guys, Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make an art label group and possession style hard melodic techno track. As usual, you can get the full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video that you just heard in the intro is available at the top of the description. Really helps support me if you guys are enjoying these videos. Consider going to pick that up. And yeah, let's dive in. Alright, so we're at 140 BPM. Already, a little bit faster, but it works really well for this style of techno. And the first thing we have here is the kick. This kick is 3 layers. It's the kick, this extra high layer, and then the rumble bass. So the kick is pretty straightforward. As usual, it's just going to be a nice, dry, fat kick. And then this layer is just one of my kicks. You can see I zoomed in here and lined up the transient. But that's just on top with a high pass filter. So a little bit more punch, as you can hear. And the last layer here is the bass, and this is a bit of a new technique. Now the point of this video in general, because I've made quite a few videos in this style before, is to show you guys new techniques that I haven't shown you yet. And this one is essentially how you can create like a really nice rumble bass that also has a lot of movement and kind of works as its own percussion. Because I've noticed in these tracks, and you can actually see it here too, the percussion. Yeah, you want to keep that stuff pretty light and airy. You don't want to have too much in the mid-range, but then this bass is a good place where we can kind of create some movement and some percussion like that. So it's the same kick you saw for the main kick, it's just doing 16th notes. And then it's going through this multi-band distortion rack here. So what's happening is we've got a high, the highs being distorted a bit. The lows are going through a bass amp. You'll notice this is all being blended as well. And then we have the mids going through this chain. So it's essentially if you split it into these 3 different chains, we're just kind of using this one layer to get a lot more sound. Because again, usually you would have this just be the rumble and the low end. But now we just have these kind of subtle mid-range and high-end layers in there. And that's so much percussion just from this one sound, just really from the kick. So for the mid-range, what's happening, this is really the key to it all because it's this low-pass filter with an envelope on it, or with an LFO. You can see the LFO is doing 8th notes, and it's the saw wave down. So what's happening is it's going brown, 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 constantly. So if I turn that off, essentially we're feeding the into it from the kick, and then this, it's those 2 rhythms together, the and the kind of combining. And yeah, it's a really great way to add some movement to your rumble basses like this, because it's definitely a sound that if you want it to be, you could always just make it a low end rumble, but it's just a good way to add some movement there. The other key to this is the drive. Obviously I've got it on the OSR setting. The drive is up pretty heavy, so yeah, you can hear how that shapes the sound. Then we have the short reverb. Here's without it. And with it. It's really subtle, but just adds a little bit more room to it. I have this amp here as well to distort it a little. And then the EQ, which is just what makes it only in the mid-range. And yeah, so then after that audio effect track, I'll turn that off too and just show you. That's without it. And then with it. So yeah, then that's just being sidechained to the main kick. I have this EQ here, which is cutting it at 21 Hz just to cut out some low frequencies that we wouldn't really hear, but would mess up the headroom of the mix. And then I also have this just cutting off the highs. And then finally just a utility to make sure that everything is going to be in mono. And then on the group of the kicks, so all that we have going on here actually is you can see pretty much just some filtering. That compressor wasn't doing anything. But what's happening here is we have an EQ right off the bat just cutting out the low end stuff that we're not really going to hear. That, like I said, can kind of mess up your mix. Then we have this low pass filter here just to bring it in the intro, as well as this high pass filter. You can see there's automation on that throughout the track. I'm also automating the filter frequency on that a lot. And essentially, these just make the kick more dynamic, because one thing about these style tracks, it can sound really good if you start with just the kick, especially if you have a kick that has so much movement. But if you just start with this for the entire first minute, that's gonna be kind of boring. This way we have it really fade in. naturally. And then we get to there. But it's like, again, just getting more sort of like movement out of one element. Rather than having like 8 bars of just the kick and then bring in a percussion loop. Just using the kick as its own thing. And say more with less. And yeah, then we have our percussion. Which is actually going to be pretty straightforward. The thing with these silent tracks is that I think it can be tempting to do like too much percussion. Like in terms of just having like, you know, a ton of different loops and like mid-range percussion and stuff. But you actually want to keep it pretty light and airy. Like this. Because like if we put it with that bass loop, you hear like that's all the percussion you need. But if we try to go and do too much here, it's going to get in the way of that, and then we're not going to hear that shining through as much. So, with this one, the first layer here is just like this crunchy loop. You can hear this has that very like 90s, 2000s style of sound. So we've got that in there. That just sounds nice and crunchy. And it's one of those things where you kind of have to use a loop for it as well. Like, you hear all the sound that's going on there. Like, you really don't get that without a live loop like this. Then we just have this 909 hi-hat. You know, pretty straightforward stuff. But the main thing here is just tuning it down a lot, making it very deep. Also have a 909 ride here with a high-pass filter. And then finally just the rolls loop. And same deal with this one. It's just kind of like... You need those loops in there to really give it the full amount of energy. Because if we just have the programmed hi-hats... Like, it just doesn't have that same thing going on there. And then, you can see the rolls have a little bit of a low-pass filter on them, just to bring them in. But then there's nothing on the group of percussion. So it's just solid percussion sounds that work already and don't need all that extra processing. Then we have this rolling bass. Which is just going da-da, 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 da-da. So yeah, that just kind of comes in the middle of the track because I noticed like with this synth sequence here, it sounded a lot better to have that rolling bass just kind of like constantly going. And we'll get rid of that, you can hear it's a bit empty. And all this is it's just a square wave and then another square wave with a bit of pulse width on it. And then a low pass filter with this envelope as well, just to make it a bit more plucky. I have an echo here doing dotted quarter notes, which has some automation as well, because there's like, yeah, this one spot. We're just kind of making it disappear. I've got some drum bus. I have an EQ here, which is cutting out the low end so that this isn't going to actually get in the way of like the bass. But then it also does that automation there just to kind of make it disappear in the break. And then finally I just have a compressor side chaining this to the kick. And then we have the synth sequence. So all of these synths on their own are actually not that complicated. I'm going to break them down. But here it's really about having like kind of these different ones talking to each other, right? Like you really don't want to just like have too much. I'm trying to think of the best way to work this, but you really don't want to have too much like open space when it comes to these, right? Like we're gonna have these constantly happening, and you don't even have to have this many. I mean, part of the reason why I have this many is because of the tutorial, and I want to showcase a lot of different stuff. But it's like, you know, just having that dynamic between these two, for example. Like, let's say you make a track where it's just these two elements. You know, it just sounds better than if you just constantly chug on that same one synth over and over and over. And what it's also doing is it's creating call and response, right? You have your call and then your response. And in this case, it's like a lot more too because it's 4 of them. Well, really like 6 of them, I guess you could say. But yeah, so that's how you want to think about it. You know, it's like not just having like that one synth that's just going to keep repeating over and over, but maybe having like a few different ones kind of contrasting each other. And then within that, some of these are even working together. So the first sound here is this analog synth. It's really simple as far as the notes. It's just I was trying to go for that more like glitchy, kind of warped, sort of like alien lead. The way this one's made is it's using analog. So the first thing here is it's 2 saw waves, lots of detuning, and we also have a low pass filter which has an envelope and an LFO on it. So it's getting lots of movement. We also have the amp envelope set like that. And then what's happening here is we have a bit of vibrato, and then I'm using this unison delay here. So if you turn up the unison, I'll turn it off the unison for a second just so you can see what I mean. So you hear a lot of that is happening from that unison there. And essentially what's happening is we have it set to 4 voices. So for every 1 note you play, it's playing 3 more on top of it. So it's playing 4 total notes. And then the delay here allows you to push the other ones back. So essentially you get like da-da-da-da. Like if I turn it up really high, it's like full 16th notes. It's just da-da-da-da. But then here, if we set it to 62 milliseconds, what happens is you're getting that delay, but they're still very close together. So it's just kind of creating that like warped, crazy texture. You can hear again, like it happens without that. Like definitely in terms of making the lead, this is only step 1. Because like if I turn off that saturator, obviously it's not nearly as crazy. But yeah, so that's the first thing that's happening there inside of the synth. Then we have some reverb, pretty short. And then I have this wave shaper, saturator here. So you heard without that, yeah, this is like really crunching this up. Just giving it that like messed up, like dirty, broken sort of feel. And it also helps having the reverb go into that. And then we have this fast echo, a high pass filter, and then just a compressor side chaining into the kick. And then for these two work together. So what's happening is for these first 2, they're playing chords where we have like one playing the high notes and one playing the low notes. And then on the last 2 there, it plays the same note because it goes A sharp and then A. Which you can notice, I had this one go up and this one go down. So it kind of just makes it a little bit more interesting. But yeah, so pretty simple stuff there. It just sounds really cool when you have 2 different layers playing chords like this, essentially. That's how the sound works. And so for the low layer, it's made with wavetable. They're both made with wavetable, pretty much. So what this is it's a saw wave with a bunch of unison. And then just a clean saw wave underneath it to give it a little bit more definition. And then we're multiband distorting it here, you can see, so I've got my highs. As usual, we're blending it, so that you're not just going to like kind of mess up the sound, but instead we're just adding this crunchy layer on top of the sound, and then with the mid-range, get that, and then the lows are clean. And that's just being sidechained to the kick and high pass. And then for this one, it's actually a pretty similar sound where it's wavetable, 1 saw wave. But the key to this one is it's using the noise unison. And so that's a big part of this, is the low notes have a different type of unison on them than the high notes. And that's what I was talking about when you have like the 2 different textures playing 1 chord. And then this one's got that same multiband distortion. The other thing here too is like, if you have something with distortion, and you try to play chords, you can hear it can get a bit crunchy. But if you split it across 2 different layers, there's no problem there with the distortion. And then it's just being sidechained and high pass. Then for this little synth arp here, so it's just A sharp, F, which is technically the minor 6th of A, and then back down to that A sharp there. So actually pretty simple. And then these notes up here are just like following the same notes pretty much. And then for this sound, it's also made with wavetable. So this one is this shimmer unison saw wave, and then another one with no unison. So same deal there. It just sounds really good when you do it that way, because you really get the fullness of the unison, but still like that sharpness from the dry saw wave. And yeah, and then that's just going through a bit of echo. I've got a multi-band distortion on this one, which is actually kind of similar to the last rack you saw. A compressor side chaining it to the kick, a high pass filter, and then just a bit of EQ. But you'll notice here, like with a lot of these patches, they're kind of similar. But that's actually a good workflow, I think. Like, it's about like, you know, maybe you might make this one, right? And that sounds pretty cool. And you have this multi-band distortion rack. It's like, why not try and make more synths out of that? Like, then you can go and say, okay, what does that sound like with this like shorter, more choppy sound? You know, instead of every single time just grabbing wavetable and going from scratch again, you're going to get pretty bored of that method of sound design really quick. And then the last sounds down here are these two, which play off of each other. So it's this wavetable patch, which is just like this nice, super detuned patch. You can see we have a saw wave and then a square wave, which is up at the highest setting on the detune. And then I also have the noise unison all the way up. So you're just getting that nice, like, like that. And then the key to this one is it's going through some reverb, and then after that, it's going through an amp. So here's without that. And then with it. So that's what really gives it that crunch, and also brings up the reverb a little bit to just make it a bit more full. And then finally, it's just being sidechained. And then this one is just a stab sample. Going through a bit of delay. You can hear, you get a nice contrast there between, like, one element is very, like held out, and then one is very quick and stabby. So it's about that kind of, like, contrast there. And then on the group of this synth stuff, all we have is just kind of like some transitional stuff. Like, this is why I put these all in a group, is because you can see there's just this part in the track where they all play together and then it ends. So what we can do is we can just have them in a group, and then we have a low pass filter just moving up and down throughout to give it some automation and kind of bring it to life a little bit, you know, and make it kind of transition. Like, you can see the parts, right? Like, we have, it's coming in, and then we have the part where it's in, like, at its fullest, and then we have the part where it's disappearing, and it's very clear this way. And then also, we have this reverb here, which is just transitioning, like here, like in this break to make everything disappear. Then we have this little wavetable arp, which sounds like this. So for the notes, this one is really simple. It's just A and A sharp. So we're just doing A in the root, and then A sharp, and then up top it's just going, you know, it creates like a nice, like, uneasy, kind of dark lead like this. And then in the parts over here where these other synths play, I just took out the root notes because it was kind of getting in the way. Now we have that. But this works really well here because in this part, like I was saying, all these synths are all washed out. And there's not really much to kind of keep the beat there. It's just this big, like, reverby kind of thing. So that's where this is coming in. You're still getting a da, like, really steady 8 notes. So you're able to keep counting still. It doesn't lose the energy. So this is actually important in, like, a lot of little subtle ways. Not just the fact that it's, you know, obviously the main synth for the intro and the outro here. But for the sound on this one, it's made with wavetable. We just have a saw wave with a bunch of unison. I really like this noise unison. It gives you that, like, really dark, like, just evil sounding unison there. I've got some chorus on this as well, with a pretty high feedback. I've got the echo on dotted quarter notes to give it, like, lots of space there. And then we have a low pass filter, which brings it in and out throughout the track. You can see that's moving pretty heavily. And then we also have a high pass filter at the end to cut out the low end. And yeah, so other than that, the only other stuff we have down here are just these effects. And you'll notice the effects are pretty sparse, especially once we have our main synths happening. You really don't need too many effects in a track like this. Like, it's just going to be little stuff here and there. Like, I have a lot of these, like, vocal effects. Yeah, just little stuff. Like, it's nice to have something like that when you don't have any other hi-hats. Or, like, stuff like that right before the end of the break. Like, we have, like, the sweep here. But it's usually just pretty kind of, like, straightforward stuff, right? Because, you know, these tracks are so full sounding, and you already have so much going on with your kick and your synths and your percussion that you really just don't need all those effects. Like, a lot of times they can take away from it. Now, where we do have a lot of effects are in the intro, because, of course, this intro is just the kick. So you're going to have to do at least something over top of that to keep it exciting. And that's where these come in, just having some stuff. These are just some of my vocal effects I made. Some of them obviously don't sound very vocal. But just having, like, those little things coming in while the kick is filtering in is going to make that intro where we don't have any extra percussion work really, really well and make the whole track feel a lot smoother. And yeah, so that is pretty much everything you need to know to make a track in the style. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets. Everything from this video is available right at the top of the description. You can either grab it on Bandcamp or on my personal website, electronicsamples.com, whichever you prefer. And yeah, thank you so much for all the support, guys. All these sample packs really help keep me going, so I can keep bringing you guys new tutorials every single day and new information like this that isn't out there, that I haven't put out on the internet before. And yeah, thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video.